This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Beginning today's show is Flinchbaugh Agricultural Policy Chair Jenny Ifft as she provides an update on the Farm Bill. Jenny explains what the key talking points of the bill currently are and where they stand. K-State weed scientist Jeremie Kouame keeps the show rolling as he talks about metabolic resistance in weeds and the issue that it will create for farmers. Gregg Eyestone, K-State Research and Extension Horticulture Agent for Riley County, ends today's show discussing the different options for adding nitrogen fertilizer to plants that might be looking a little pale or garden crops that aren't doing as well. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Thursday show with a Farm Bill update by Flinchbaugh Agricultural Policy Chair at K-State, Jenny Ifft. Jenny, thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here.
Jenny, where are we currently at with the Farm Bill?
Yeah, we're getting a lot closer, I would say. So the Senate has released a 94-page outline of what it'd like to have. Now, the Democrats are in charge, have the majority in the Senate, so that's coming from the Democratic side. The House Agricultural Committee has released Farm Bill text. This week it's going through a process called markup, so the House Ag Committee is considering amendments. If that bill comes out of markup, there's the possibility, not the promise, the possibility that it could go to the House floor to be voted on.
So slowly making progress in terms of the Farm Bill?
Yeah, no, this is definitely a step closer to having something happen. I like to look at both efforts as the respective parties negotiating positions. I don't think either of them is where we're going to end up. You put something on paper, you've moved closer, you get to a point where you can compromise. From a political perspective, they have about a 2-month window where it would be feasible to pass a new Farm Bill.
And as we're talking about this Farm Bill, something that has already been extended before, and is there concerns for how late the Farm Bill is to being done?
We're still, if you look at the past 2 decades, where we're at right now isn't outside of the norm. You have a couple of Farm Bills that were passed without an extension, and you have a couple that were passed with several extensions. So this isn't out of the ordinary. I would say if we're at the same place within a year, I might start getting nervous.
And so as we're talking about this Farm Bill and things that are happening around it, what are some of those key points or sticking points being talked about?
Well, not surprising that both parties don't agree on everything, even in the Farm Bill where there is a lot of compromise. But the two major sticking points relate to nutrition programs, specifically something called the Thrifty Food Plan and conservation funding. So I'll talk about the nutrition programs or the Thrifty Food Plan first. And we're going to have to get into some budgeting details, unfortunately, here. So the Thrifty Food Plan provides an estimate of the cost of a healthy diet for nutrition program participants, especially SNAP's Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as food stamps. So this is how the costs are estimated, and that goes into the actual payments that households receive. So in 2018, the ability to estimate that Thrifty Food Plan was moved to the USDA. So it was moved, the authority was moved from Congress to the USDA, and ultimately that led to billions of dollars of increases in nutrition program expenditure. Now keep in mind, this goes to typically to households that are below the poverty line, poor households with children, elderly households. So it gets spread out a lot, but it caused a very large increase in this total expenditure on nutrition spending. So that's what happened in the past. So you see, there's this huge, now, the Farm Bill expected spending over 10 years is over $1 trillion. A lot of the increase comes from nutrition programs. So if you look at the Farm Bill that's being negotiated right now, there's a budgeting process. And what happens is the Congressional Budgeting Office projects spending under different areas of the Farm Bill based on current policy. So for nutrition programs, what they're budgeting is a continued projected increase in spending under the assumption that the USDA can continue to adjust this thrifty food plan. So what the Republicans, that the House Ag Committee did, was they removed the ability of the USDA to further increase spending. So they took this away, and that created budget savings that could be allocated to other nutrition programs. So about 2/3 of these budget savings were kept within nutrition programs, and some of them were moved to other programs, such as foreign trade development, market access programs. So that's what the House Ag Committee, the Republican side, did. The Democrats, one of their negotiating points is you can't touch nutrition programs or nutrition spending. So that's probably going to continue to be a contentious debate.
And something else being a debate you've talked about was the Inflation Reduction Act.
The Inflation Reduction Act allocated funding for USDA conservation programs that were climate smart or contributed to greenhouse gas reduction. And actually both on the House side, the Republicans, and the Senate side, the Democrats, moved that funding into the Farm Bill. But on the Republican side, they took away these climate smart guardrails. So this money doesn't all have to be spent on practices that could potentially lead to greenhouse gas reduction. The Democratic and the Senate side, or the Democratic Party generally, they don't want to touch that. They want to say this money has to stay in climate smart funding.
So really going to take a compromise to get these two sticking points figured out?
Yeah. It's right now, those are the two major things. I'd also like to touch changes to the farm safety net programs because they look a little bit different coming from each side. So on the Senate side, they increased some of the reference prices for commodities. So 5% increase in a couple commodities. Reference prices are used for price loss coverage. So producers with base acres can benefit from these programs. They also increased the the coverage level of ARC from 86 to 88%. So the Senate side did provide some relatively modest increases in the farm safety net. On the House side, they did have larger increases. So they're increasing the statutory reference prices from 10 to 20%. So soybeans would go from $8.40 to $10, wheat from $5.50 to $3.65. The increase for corn is smaller. They also increased things on the crop insurance side. So the supplemental coverage option, which is a insurance policy you add on top of an existing revenue protection or yield protection policy. The subsidy for that goes from 65 to 80%. So it will become more cost-effective producers, and the coverage level of that goes from 86% to 90%. So there is a larger increase in safety net in the protection provided by safety net programs on the House side. So if you look at this from a negotiating perspective, I think the Senate side, what the Senate's proposing is probably the minimum we'll see. The House side is probably the maximum. So, on the House side, there are larger increases in the safety net protection provided through the Farm Bill, both through ARC and PLC and through crop insurance programs. This is going to increase spending. And the way that the House Ag Committee has budgeted for this is through taking away the authority of the Secretary of Agriculture, the USDA, to use the Commodity Credit Corporation, the CCC, which has become very relevant to foreign policy since 2018, when it was used by the Trump administration as a part of their trade war to authorize market facilitation payments, MFP. So what the House Ag Committee does is they take away this administrative power from the USDA. That leads to projected budget savings that partially pay for these increases in reference prices in the coverage provided by the supplemental coverage option. Right now, they're debating with the Congressional Budget Office. Should this be $8 billion of savings or $53 billion of savings? And that has big implications for what you can put into the Farm Bill. So whether you like it or not, congressional budgeting rules are pretty important for what farm policy looks like today.
So finding a way to figure out where all the money can go and make most people happy?
Yeah, and some of this gets down to language as well. So, are you taking away money from nutrition programs, or are you moving a projected increase, the authority over a projected increase from the USDA to Congress? So, the language with these also matters.
Jenny, would you say there's some uncertainty when it comes to things happening in D.C., specifically looking at the Farm Bill?
I mean, a lot of it, I think, relates to the upcoming election, which, your guess is as good on mine on where that's going to go. But, potentially you could see a change in the White House. You could see changes in the parties that control in the Senate and the House. And so these upcoming elections can affect how members of Congress approach the Farm Bill. And there's really two main ways. One is if members from a district with a lot of agriculture want to provide a farm bill, to show that as a policy win for their constituents. And so this actually plays into the House Ag Committee, controlled by Republicans. So they're trying to get Democrats from ag districts to come into the farm bill they've proposed. And that explicitly relates to that. The other approach is, I think my party is going to take over, the executive branch or one of the houses of Congress. So I want to wait till I have more control and can have more power over that. And so, ultimately it's really hard to say which one will have more sway in the end.
So while the Farm Bill is not complete, hopefully making a step in the right direction to being able to say, here's the Farm Bill.
Yep, no, we are definitely getting closer.
Jenny, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and give us an update on the Farm Bill.
You're welcome.
That was Flinchbaugh Agricultural Policy Chair at K-State, Jenny Ifft. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Thursday show talking about metabolic resistance in crops. And then to talk about it, we're joined by K-State wheat scientist Jeremie Kouame. Jeremie, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having us, Shelby.
Jeremie, what is metabolic resistance?
When it comes to herbicide resistance, we've been talking about, target site resistance, but also non-target site resistance. And so metabolic resistance is part of a non-target site resistance. And so what happens is the weeds are increasing their capacity of their ability to degrade herbicides faster. So they have this ability to break down herbicides to some what we call metabolites, which are no longer toxic for the plant. So this is basically what we call metabolic resistance. And so there are some large enzyme families that are responsible for breaking down those chemistries. So we have what we call the cytochrome P450s, but also we have the glutathione S-transferases or GSTs. So that's how metabolic resistance occurs.
And for resistance, is it then resistance to all herbicides or just certain ones?
That's where the concern with metabolic resistance comes in, because those enzymes break down herbicides. Previous reports showed that even herbicides which the weeds were not exposed before can, the weed can evolve resistance to those because the enzyme can break down those herbicides. So it provides a wider range of resistance to weeds or to herbicides, sorry. So that's the major concern with metabolic resistance.
Is this something we have in Kansas?
Oh, yes, we do have it in Kansas. And so K-State researchers found in a palmer population, which was collected from a long-term conservation tillage research project, that palmer has evolved resistance to what we call six-way resistance. And what this means is, herbicides of group 2, herbicides such as Glean, Harmony, Pursuit, Beyond, could not control this population. And 2,4-D as a group 4, and atrazine and metribuzin as a group 5. We also have glyphosate, group 9. But the PPO herbicides, Flexstar, Cobra, and HPPD herbicides such as, Callisto and Lodis, all these chemistries could not control this population. So that's why, metabolic resistance becomes a threat because it provides resistance to so many herbicide site of actions. And so, we do have it in Kansas.
Jeremie, what weeds are we seeing metabolic resistance in?
This is a good question, Shelby. So the ones we are sure of, first of all, Palmer, as we already talked about, and water hemp is one of them as well. So research is still going on to, see if kochia and sugarcane and other weeds also have metabolic resistance.
So with metabolic resistance, what do people need to be doing?
So, when it comes to weed control and management, our chemistries are really, really important. And the thing is, we need to preserve those for, the longer we do, the better it is for us, right? So, and we know that those chemistries, we don't have new chemistries coming to the market that often. And in addition to that, with full compliance of EPA to the Endangered Species Act, we'll have more constraints on herbicide labels. And when we add the herbicide resistant issues to this, we need to be really, mindful about protecting or preserving our chemistries as long as possible. So, and what we say is, these are things our growers already know or have already heard about, but we need to emphasize them more often. So these are like the best management strategies for managing herbicide-resistant weeds. And so one aspect we always talk about is how, they need to start clean and stay clean, which means they have to always, plant in weed-free, fields and prevent those, field to field and even within field weed seed movement, which means make sure that the equipment which are used in one field before they move to another field, they get those cleaned to remove any potential weed seeds there and prevent any weed seed, influx from the borders, because, those borders need to be kept as clean as possible. The thing is, some weeds such as Palmer do have, separate male and female plants. And if we have some infestations in the border, we can have a transfer of resistance to a field. And other species, we're talking about Johnson grass, for example, or sugarcane, which are relatives of grain sorghum. We don't want our resistant traits in the crop, to be transferred to those populations in the borders. Again, to emphasize the importance to maintain those field borders as clean as possible. And other thing is, it's all about giving a strong competitive ability to our crops, against the weeds. So any strategies that help us improve the competitiveness of our crops, with weeds are welcome. When it comes to row spacing, seeding rates, even competitive cultivars, all these are really important aspects to, integrate to our systems. And our weeds, such as Palmer, can produce, up to 1 million seeds, for example. If a single female plant can produce up to 1 million seeds, and this is a lot. And so what we recommend growers is to prevent those seeds from going back to the seed bank. And so research is still going on to evaluate what we call, harvest weed seed control strategies. And what this means is, we have some tools that we call the seed extractor, for example, that can help, grind the weed seeds so those seeds are not going back to the seed bank. We have what we call chaff lining, which basically is, kind of concentrating the chaff, with the weed seeds. And so the assumption is like, the environment created by the chaff will prevent, weed seed emergence and, future problems. So all these strategies, in combination with our residual herbicides, which are really critical, because our, residual programs help us, prevent those weeds from emerging. And also, like post-emergence herbicides have to be optimized, be timely, and use multiple effective herbicide mode of actions for those programs. So combining all these strategies will help us, keep those chemistries, effective for a longer duration. So that's what I would say when it comes to how we can, manage those herbicide-resistant weeds.
Is this something then that producers really should probably keep top of mind because it could be something in their future?
Yes, these are things to definitely keep in mind because this is step on top of our weeds. And the way we can delay herbicide resistance evolution. So it's something we need to keep in mind.
Jeremie, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and talk with us about metabolic resistance.
Thank you very much, Shelby, for this opportunity. I was glad to be here.
That was K-State weed scientist Jeremie Kouame. I will put a link in today's show notes on agtoday.net where you can read more about metabolic resistance. Before we cut to a break, we're now going to be joined by USDA's Rod Bain and USDA Chief Meteorologist Mark Brusberg as he talks about a unique multi-day rain event in southern Brazil that raised concern how crops currently under harvest might be affected.
This from the May USDA World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimate Briefing.
We saw a very horrible story coming out of southern Brazil.
Agriculture Department Chief Meteorologist Mark Brusberg says that event was a multi-day inundation of rainfall.
We're talking about 3 to 4 day total rainfall accumulations, in some places anywhere between 10 and 20 inches of rain, caused deadly flooding. It made international news.
Or put another way, the deluge was a half year of rain accumulation in a 1 week period.
In terms of agriculture, it was untimely, to say the least, for crops such as corn, soybeans, and rice. All of them are being harvested right now.
Some of the information gleaned by USDA about Brazilian rains and impacts to its crop harvest includes
about 3/4 of the soybean crop in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, where the heavy rain fell, was in the bin. So we had to take a look at what was left, where the heaviest rain fell, and do our best to try to estimate how much was damaged. We came up with an initial estimate of about 1 million tons just from that state alone. So we're expecting about 1 million tons of that to be lost.
Brusberg says damage assessment continues.
We're getting reports that it's not going to be total losses, but also loss in quality. Anecdotally, we're getting estimates of losses ranging from sprouting of unharvested crops in the field to actual damage in storage facilities where crops that had already been harvested may have suffered some losses.
Rainfall lightened in Brazil this past week, yet that has still slowed down both recovery and crop damage assessment efforts.
Could be a while before we know exactly how much damage was done to the standing soybeans and grain crops.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you ahead.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. If your plants are looking a little pale or the garden crops aren't doing as well as you'd like, they may need some additional nitrogen. K-State Research and Extension Horticulture Agent for Riley County, Gregg Eyestone, says that there are several options available for increasing nitrogen levels in the soil. Gregg, we've had a number of incidents where we've had widespread rain across the state, and as a result, we're probably seeing some maybe too much rainfall in our gardens and on the landscape. And something we may want to consider is top dressing or some side dressing.
Yeah, so nitrogen is the element, nutrient that our plants use in quite abundance compared to other elements. And so it is a mobile unit as well. So when it rains, it may leach past our root zone. It may, on hot days, may vaporize back into the atmosphere. And so we need to regulate our nitrogen applications on a season-to-season basis. You might have added some to start with in your planting, whether it be through some compost type of organic nitrogen or synthetic fertilizer. But when we have rains, it can leach it and remove some of that. And you may see some paler looking leaves, a lighter green color than normal, and that may be an indication that we need to add some nitrogen. So if you've been doing a little bit of studying on your soils and your plants, you kind of have a feeling for whether you need to add nitrogen or not. And taking a look at your plants is probably the best way to indicate that.
So what are the options then if we want to add a little bit more?
So there's about 3 different products that I typically find. Urea is a synthetic nitrogen-only fertilizer, and that's what we're looking at, something that's not adding phosphorus or potassium, unless our soil test would indicate we need that. So we're adding nitrogen. As far as urea, it's really concentrated. It's usually the least expensive, but you need to be careful because of that concentration that you're just applying the right amount, and that sometimes may get a little tricky. And so if you're going to fault on the one side, a little less is better than too much. Salt's what builds up in these fertilizers, and so if we get a fertilizer burn, it's not really a temperature thing. It's a dehydration of the root system by using too much fertilizer, which has a little too much salt for that system there. So a little bit of urea could be an option. We have the blood meal, which is kind of our organic option, and that will require just more application of that product. I do have a chart that is available on our website. So if you go to the riley.ksu.edu website and look under Lawn and Garden, Soil Fertility link there, you would find that chart. Otherwise, you're reading the product label, and that's a good place to start as well. And so that blood meal is a good source, but it can be more expensive than some of the other options. Another option that I do find is ammonium sulfate, and there should be some instructions on that as well. So the urea is about a 46% nitrogen. Ammonium sulfate is a little bit less. It's around 20% nitrogen. And so you would need 5 pounds of that 20% to get 1 actual pound of nitrogen. And that's typically how things are listed, pound per 1,000 square feet or 100 square feet in a vegetable garden. So there's a little bit of math, but it's usually easier just to look on the label and err on the light side, and if it doesn't green up as much as you would like, then you'd add a little bit more in the future.
So this is something that you can continue to add when needed.
It is, and there's certain stages depending on what you're trying to grow. If you're growing like annual flowers, we like to add a little bit on a routine basis, whether it be once a week or once a month, depending on the concentrate that you're putting on. Some of our vegetables, like sweet corn, is one that really does better if you add some nitrogen, and there's different stages where it's more important. So you get your corn up 8 to 10 inches. It's usually a good time to add a little bit more nitrogen, and then it tassels, another good opportunity to add a little bit more nitrogen. That kind of specific information can be found on my chart or, in some other type of resources. But basically, watching your plant is a good way. And if it's a little pale because of all the moisture that we've had, then adding a little bit of nitrogen once it starts to dry out would be a suggestion.
That's K-State Research and Extension Horticulture Agent for Riley County, Gregg Eyestone, with information on increasing nitrogen levels. Again, to view the chart, go to riley.ksu.edu, look under Lawn and Garden, Soil Fertility. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.